years, and this year we have all that plus Gamergate, and trying to put that in some sort of context literally did keep me awake half the night. And this is a very hard, this turned out, this used to be the easiest class to get a guest speaker for, and to some extent, because people feel queasy about Gamergate, it was considerably more difficult to do that this year, which I find really troubling on a whole bunch of levels, and I'll address that indirectly in the talk. We do, however, have Mia Consalvo, who is the leading video game academic, in my view, in Canada. She's going to come to us from Concordia University in Montreal. You'll see online her very extensive credentials. She's going to talk about cheating in games, but that in many ways her work bears on all of the social issues that relate to games. So this is also this is a day of experiments and upcoming experiments. So this will, for this year, be the first remote connection that we're doing. So keep your fingers crossed, because there can be adventures. All right. So the wiki of the first edition, I don't know if anybody's looked at it. It's up, and it is searchable. The search is not perfect, and I'm going to see if it can be fine-tuned, because it searches all UBC wikis, but if you put in Atari, it's going to really come back to the book. So it's fairly easy to dismiss the search results you don't want, and really easy to go with the search results you do want. They are, the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology are figuring out ways that we can do a search just within the book on this wiki, but at least for the purposes of your papers and for your research, hopefully this is a good step forward. I think it's in many ways amazing. All right, let's briefly talk about badges. There have been 12 badges awarded. We have new badges, which I'll show you in a minute, and we have renamed the badges to follow the course flow and the course memes, just because it's more fun. So subscriber, you get for your first comment. Creator, 1 post, 1 comment. Connector, the reason I put it in green is because at the very beginning of the course, when I talked about the website, and I said, look, nothing's mandatory, but the basic concept of what I'd like you to do in terms of participation is 1 post and 3 comments. So that's why that's in green. And controller, no one has gotten yet, but someone does have 5 posts, but hasn't quite reached 10 comments. So that's why I put that in orange, to bring that to their attention. They probably know who they are. New badges. So these just came down the pike literally yesterday, but they're up now. So hopefully there won't be any technical glitches in terms of switching over. If there are, let me know. This will be for subscriber, the talk bubble. Creator is the law book. How I know that's a law book is not clear, but it's a book in any event. Connector is the arrow, and controller will be the much coveted gavel. So it's fun. It's just an experiment. Nobody should take this too seriously. There are really interesting things that I can see over time happening, like embedding the entire course with paths through the course that are achievement oriented, and that if you give proper note, I'm talking about 3 years from now, not this class, but where if someone's interested in the intellectual property issues in video games, and that's your path, that we can embed all the materials so that you follow that path and you have sort of a glass that becomes 3/4 full, and when you've reached the required amount of stuff you have to do aside from your paper, and you followed the materials you need to follow, and everyone can have their own path through the course. It could be that open world video game concept that we talked about, and it can all be tracked. Is that a good idea? Isn't that a good idea? Not a problem for your course in your class, because it isn't going to happen now. But there's some interesting pedagogic questions. Now, the Oculus Project. That is going to happen next week, appropriately enough, when the topic is privacy. And there's a whole bunch of things that we need to sort through. We today have 5 Oculuses that you can take home for the week. Let me try and explain how this is going to work. So we have 4 because Dan Silverman has taken 1 away until this afternoon to test it and do a bunch of things. So first of all, we've arranged for another room, which is room 111 on the first floor, where the folks with Oculuses will hang out during next week's class. Although initially possible, it really didn't seem wise to have people either at home or elsewhere in the law school. It was going to create certainly a distraction, possibly a hazard. This is all very experimental, so it seems intelligent to contain it. What will you see if you participate in this? You will see the slides, hear me, and apparently there will be some sort of avatar of me, which has already been made, but no one has shown me yet, presumably so I can't veto it or be too insulted by it. The first thing I look at is, do they have my hair gray or not? That's just so you know, whenever anybody does something like that, that's the only thing I care about. And there will be a Kinect in front of me. I will be a little less mobile than I usually am. I'm going to have to stand behind this table, but you will get all my usual gesticulations through the avatar. But you won't actually see me. You'll see some representation of me. You will hear me, and you will see the slides. That's likely the experience. As I understand it, it's probably what I warned you about in terms of people getting sick is probably not going to happen, because you're stationary, you're sitting, you're at a table. There's not, where the other stuff tends to happen is when you're actively playing a game and there's movement. There's not going to be much movement here. But you will see the advantages and the restrictions of the technology. Okay, so how do we do this? So one thing that the developers, Jesse Judre, is a colleague for a number of years, and he's done all of this for us. And he is a developer working on Oculus. I don't want to say exclusively, but largely. and he's been a games developer for many, many years, and this is his current focus. So he's gotten the beta kits. The one thing that they would like, which I think is entirely fair, is reactions and feedback on the experience, because that's why they want to do this, is to get feedback so they can make their products better and figure out what they're doing. And they've developed custom software for all of this, so it's real. So the one thing they've asked, if possible, is an equal number of men and women. And that's a little bit difficult because there's more guys in the class. We've probably done better than past years in terms of proportion of women, but I don't think we're still quite equal. So, but they want that because they want to test the differences in perception and all of that. So at the end of the class, I will ask that, well, I think what I'll do is I'll pass out with the attendance sheet a sign-out sheet. So if you're interested, there's Oculus W, Oculus M. Put your name on, and let's see how many people actually want to do this. The rest are in the class. And we've booked room 111, so, and nobody's obligated. If they're not comfortable, you don't have to worry about it. So there will be 4 kits, and I will want pretty detailed information from you. There will be 4 kits that we'll give away, hopefully 2 men, 2 women, at the end of the class today, which you will bring back next week, and which you can't keep, regrettably. And you will, what you're really undertaking to do is that during the week you'll do the setup. And you will correspond with Jesse to make sure that it's all working. Couple of things. The best experience with the Oculus in terms of smoothness and just overall experience, if you happen to have a Retina MacBook with HDMI out, you are assured an amazing experience. Basically, any good spec laptop will work. Not going to give preference to Retina MacBooks, but if you have one with an HDMI out, at least scribble your name next to it. If you don't get one of the 4 today, and one that you can pick up from, or one you can pick up from Dan this afternoon, there will be more next week, and you have to show up at 10 o'clock to make sure that you've loaded it onto your computer and done all of that. So I don't know how many more we'll have next week. It will depend on, in part, how many people are interested in doing this. Next week's topic, I mentioned already, is privacy. Now, you should be able to ask questions, but you should assume if you do this, the degree of interactivity that's going to be available to you will be less than in the classroom. I'm not at all sure if someone has a question and they're in room 111, how I'm going to know that. And we'll see. We'll see. Do I have a setup? Is there a laptop? Et cetera, et cetera. So let me at least get this started. And maybe just make sure that everybody has it. And it isn't first come, first serve. If there's too many people, I'll find a way of drawing from a hat or doing whatever needs to be done at the end of the class. Any questions on any of this? All right. Just so you know, we're first on a number of things. We are not the first classroom in the world to use Oculus. This is happening particularly this semester in a number of different universities, in a number of different places. This is, but it's interesting. All right. Lot to try and go through and difficult subjects today. So what I really want are interruptions and questions. And I'm going to rely on you actually reading the slides on your own time, and I'm going to do topics and concepts, because taking you through the slides in detail won't work. There's way too much. We could have a 7-hour class on violence and misogyny in games, easily. And I also want to start with what I promised I would last week at Jennifer Kelly's request. And that's to talk about personality in games. And I'm going to do a very quick, but hopefully colorful review of originality in games, not in copyright. So personality, trademark, and patent. And it's going to be very quick, but if you're doing a paper in these areas, it will help lead you to the right place. So in terms of personality rights, you have to, we're just going to look at BC, and you have to look at it in terms of our act. It is a tort to use the name or portrait of another for advertising, promoting the sale, or trading in property or services unless there's consent. And that tort does not survive death, which does not mean that if you use somebody's image in an unauthorized way, you should kill them. There's a Gamergate joke in there somewhere, but I'm just not going to lower myself to it. Anyways, I can only imagine what happens just because I said that. In any event, what is actually important here is to understand that in Canada and in British Columbia, the use of images is seen not as a quasi-property right. And not as an intellectual property right at all. So you have two choices. It's not quite a property right, because it's extinguished by death. It's a personal. So the best you can say about it is it's a personal property right. But it's not really in the context of intellectual property at all. It's a hybrid. And it's its own thing. So examples, this woman is suing Grand Theft Auto 5. This is the person, this is the character in the game. She's alleging that that's her image. I've tried to update these. Pending. This one's awesome. I don't really know who Lady Miss Keir was. This is kind of early 2000 or something. And this was a character in a Sega game. And Sega, she sued. Sega won. The court found that, in fact, this character was not based on her, but on another singer in another dance band. So you can find the case. Yeah, I know this sort of belongs in the who cares category, and I thought, should I put it in or shouldn't I? But this really did happen. Suits and countersuits, and very unclear where this is currently at. The latest on it, this was December 16th, 2013. there was a fight over the venue of the lawsuit. So we are now moving on to a year from there and haven't heard anything. Doesn't mean nothing's happening, means I can't find it on the internet. I can't find mention of it.
How do the statutory rights interact with the common law right to personality? Krauss would be part of it.
So Krauss, yes. So the answer to that is that we don't really know because there have been so few actions. So we have Krauss and Chrysler. So if memory serves, football player, image used in a poster, court does not find. I think it was the CFL. It was the CFL team that used. It was a CFL player, and it was Chrysler that used the image of the player, and the court did not find against Chrysler. So we don't have. We've got Athens, which is another case where there was a finding. So we do have this common law right, and there haven't been a lot of actions for a while. We have a local statutory right. That's hardly used. In Canada, it's not very well developed law. In the United States, as we talked about last week, it's become very well developed law. None of these cases, certainly as they relate to video games, are Canadian. So probably the best answer is this is a fantastic paper at the end of the day. And that sounds like avoidance, and it isn't really meant to be, but we don't know. We don't know. It hasn't parsed itself out that well in the United States, but it hasn't parsed itself out at all in Canada. And I would say, you tell me, where there's a common law right and a statutory right, what happens? My understanding is that the courts will blend the two together to some extent, and they are separate causes of action unless they directly contradict each other. The Privacy Act provision says nothing that would contradict the common law. It simply says there is a right unless there's consent. And it does put one restriction. It says it's got to be commercial in some aspect. So I would say if you just use someone's personality in a completely non-commercial way in British Columbia, you at least have an argument. And in the context of mods, that becomes interesting. But we have nothing's tested this out. This was settled, but really Gwen Stefani won. So it was settled, but I think it was quite far along, and I think it's more than fair to say that she won this case. She was very unhappy with how Activision got the rights in Band Hero and whether they really had the rights. It was more of a contract case, but it ended up looking like a personality case. This was interesting. The family of John Dillinger suing Electronic Arts because of their reference to the Dillinger Tommy gun in a game. And court finding that was in fact not a problem. courts have not been, even in the United States, as you can infer from the last few slides, running amok, awarding large damages for breach of personality rights. While we're at it, and we did cover this earlier in the course, but I just wanted to give you some quick illustrations. This, a couple of years ago, Zynga basically wanted the word "vil" to be theirs. And in essence, that has not happened. But there are lawsuits, there's all sorts of lawsuits. Just look up Zynga litigation history on Wikipedia, and you'll see that there is all sorts of stuff. But at the end of the day, it doesn't appear to be going there. Another Zynga case, the Oregon Trail was an educational game. Zynga created Frontierville, Oregon Trail, where Zynga was sued. Zynga backed off at the end of the day, renamed its game Pioneer Trail. Jennifer referred briefly to this one, just more than anything wanted you to at least have the graphic. And this was the bar in New Jersey that sued Rockstar over Grand Theft Auto, saying, "You copied our bar." And again, Rockstar succeeded. And the bar didn't succeed, and the court, you can look this up, the court, I want to say, said it was ridiculous, but the court was holding tongue-in-cheek to some extent. So these cases are not really succeeding. Finally, patent rights. Crazy Taxi versus Simpson Road Rage, which you would have thought might have been not about patents. If you look at the statement of claim, because there were patents involved, that gave the developer of Crazy Taxi more oomph, and I think it's more or less on record that that's why the developer of Simpsons Road Rage settled. If it had been just a copyright case, maybe they wouldn't have, but the patents can be scary. On the other hand, this is an awesome case because we actually have a decision. And your students, has anybody ever seen Golden Tee? No. All right. So a couple years ago, this was a pretty big game in bars. I guess it's just not there anymore. And it's a golf game, and it has a certain control mechanism. And EA, who was making Tiger Woods at the time, made this game, PGA Golf. They had the license from the PGA. They had their software from Tiger Woods, and they basically used the same control mechanism. And they built a remarkably similar game, as you will see, and the court said, no, control ball, similar mechanism. How else would you do a golf game? We're not going to go in there. And when you go through it, if this case is not going to create an infringement, you get the sense of the reluctance that the court has across all the genre of cases, including trademark and personality rights, to go, you know what, we don't want, unless it's absolutely a screaming copy, to infringe on creativity in this area. This is probably, in my mind, the best example of the court's reluctance, because it's really, really close. And I would, I'd say to you, if you're interested in this area, read the case, and you'll see the descriptions are so similar, and then the court goes the other way than you might expect them to go once you've read.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Which type of IP was the Golden Tee and PGA Tour? Like, was it trademark?
No, patent.
That was patent.
It was patent. Yeah, and again, there's quirkiness, because if you're a court, you can, you can always say patent's not the right remedy here, but that's not really what it was about. The court basically said they did the equivalent of savoir faire in copyright law, and said, look, there are just some things that aren't protectable because they come with the territory. And that's very interesting when applied to patent law, applied to games. So, this is the tough one. This is always the fun class, because the issues of misogyny, though present, always were taking a backseat to the debate about violence and, was it video games that caused the murders at Columbine, et cetera, et cetera. And this year, because of Gamergate, this stuff and Sandy Hook sort of takes a backseat. But I'm going to try and go through this step by step. And I've thought a lot about how to go through it, and I hope I've picked a way that's responsible and fair and clear. So the first place to start is something we've talked about. And as a background to all of this, let's just remember the data is that overall game population, video game population, is about 1/3 kids. And what's interesting about that is, are they agreeing to end user license agreements? What regime are they playing these games under? And that's very unclear. We don't have decisions about that. We do have a number of regulatory body decisions around what happens when kids buy apps on their parents' iPad. And we have a number of serious fines in the United States and elsewhere of distributors and of Google and of others for allowing that sort of thing to happen. And we don't have a whole lot. We don't have any that I know of, and perhaps someone can find one, where a game developer has sued a parent saying, you bought all these, your child bought all these games, and you owe us $10,000, and we're here to collect. In theory, they should be able to do that. They're electing not to do it. And the similar situation, which may have happened to some of you because it happened to a lot of kids, but when you were not of the age of majority, perhaps you had a cell phone and perhaps you incurred huge roaming charges, This definitely happens in high schools today. And your parents get like a bill for $2,000. Usually the phone company settles those things because they don't really want to go to court. And I think that was happening in this area. So we don't really have a test of EULAs in this context that I know of. And if someone can find one, I would be eternally grateful. Which raises, going back to our discussion of end-user license agreements in terms of service, what's going on here? And is industry using EULAs in terms of service in an unfair way? Are they avoiding the issue of kids? It's not even mentioned in most end-user license agreements. There isn't really any opportunity. They're not taking advantage of any opportunity to educate parents or educate kids on these contracts. It's still the usual boilerplate. So it kind of looks like Complicity. Sorry for wall of text here, but here's another rather different element of industry complicity in all of these social issues. This is, you might remember, after the shootings in the elementary school shootings in, was it New Jersey? Sorry, I had it in the slide. I'll have to go all the way back, but I will get there. Sandy Hook, thank you. So where was Sandy Hook? Maryland? Connecticut, thank you. So you might remember after Sandy Hook, the head of the National Rifle Association made a speech blaming video games. And the link to the speech, the transcript of the speech is there, if this is a topic that interests you, where Wayne LaPierre said, and here's another dirty little truth that the media try their best to conceal, there exists in this country, being the United States, a callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow industry that sells and sows violence against its own people through vicious, violent video games with names like Bulletstorm, Grand Theft Auto, Mortal Kombat, and Splatterhouse. Here's one, it's called Kindergarten Killers. It's been online for 10 years. Very interesting. What's missing from the list? Call of Duty, Battlefield, first-person shooters that are military in nature. Highly used first-person shooters. Why are they missing? Well, it's pretty well documented that the developers pay the gun manufacturers for the use of the images and names of the guns and the weaponry. Interesting that that wouldn't make the list of the industry association for the gun manufacturers. The fantasy games make the list. The realistic simulations don't. Is there really a distinction? I mean, you decide. To me, the simulations in many ways are worse than the fantasy murder games. But lots of discussion, lots of debate. And a fair bit of academic work in the area that you can find, if this is a subject that interests you. Another interesting piece on industry complicity is the hot coffee controversy. There was a mod to Grand Theft Auto San Andreas that was released that allowed for fairly explicit sexual content to be unlocked in the game. The key there is unlocked. The developers had left that content in. Was that a mistake? Was that irresponsibility? Or was that immaturity? And ha ha ha, we'll leave it in. Unclear and unknown. But the modder who took all the heat for it really didn't, he almost did nothing. It was really, really easy to unlock that content because it had been left there. And the developers, the key thing is when they reported to the industry association for the rating of the game, and there's quite a lot of back and forth on this, so you'd have to go through it historically. They did not mention that this content was there but locked, and the industry association said they should have. And of course, the rules have now all changed, so this can't be done again. But it stands certainly as a sign of the immaturity of the industry, and it sets the table for the misogyny issues. It's hardly the only example, but it's a useful one. And this is a slide that intentionally I wanted you to see. This is from a year ago. Penny Arcade, stuff. You should read these articles because you'll see that what we're thinking of as Gamergate has some pretty obvious roots that we're only halfway dealt with. And there was basically a conference where, women were writing, if I come to this conference, I get harassed. So there were real warning signs. So where are we now? Very quickly, so this is yesterday, I think, or the day before. Brianna Wu offers $11,000 for a harassment conviction. She was the one, her family put together the money. She's the one who was harassed, driven from her home. Anita Sarkeesian had to cancel a university talk. I'll come to it in a minute. And then here's a historical piece if you want to go back to what caused Gamergate in theory, because I would argue that this is a historical problem. And it's always been with us. And it needs to be dealt with and not ignored and not swept under the rug. Others might argue that it just started in the last little while, and it's about games journalism. We'll come to that. The important thing when you go back to the game journalism allegation is that it appears to be about a guy who was going out with someone who was in the journalism industry in games And he made an allegation after she broke up with him that somehow she was corrupted, and she, the reviews and other things of games that she was involved in were not completely on the up and up. Turns out, and again, you have to parse through all this information, so I can only say, having parsed through it, it looks like she actually wasn't even involved in the games she was alleged to have been involved in. So the whole thing starts looking really weird. So when things look weird, let's go to the data. This was a piece from Newsweek last week that very cleverly, and you're going to see a lot more of this, and I'll sort of try and show you why you will, collected data, or the researcher collected data, and data off of Gamergate, off the hashtag, and started parsing out how much of it is about game journalism and how much of it is misogynistic attitude towards women. And, data can always be interpreted, but it looks pretty clear. If you're looking for a simple explanation of that article and some simple quotes of kind of what's getting bombarded under hashtag Gamergate and how it parses out into concern about games journalism and hatred towards Anita Sarkeesian and others, and Brianna Wu and others, the numbers are there. So all of it feels like misdirection, but I think there's some other things going on. And the key is, I think, that the world really is changing. To me, this is a profound headline. This is not female gamers outnumber male gamers. We know that because of portable devices. This is female PC gamers using a computer outnumber male gamers. This is super significant. And yes, most women are not playing first-person. No, I shouldn't say most. Large numbers of women are playing first-person shooters, but and it's close. It's 50.2 to 49.9. Women are playing role-playing games more than men are on PCs. But we're all gamers. Now, you're going to restrict gaming to first-person shooters, you still have a male majority. But now you're redefining who a gamer is if you choose to do that. Ultimately, my sense is that actually this is what's starting to make it all go away, because people are laughing at the Gamergate people because it's funny. What they're doing is not funny. It's awful. And there will be criminal charges, and those things are happening. But the silliness of the misdirection is now becoming a meme. And this is a great article. It collects the memes, but this is the first one. Some of the other ones are maybe a bit more offensive. Everything I did for ethics in games journalism. Yeah. Now here's what's sort of, in my view, where this is going. I should go here. So this is a news release from the Entertainment Software Association from September 11th. Not the greatest date to have a news release. 390 colleges, universities, and other academic institutions in the United States now offer professional certificates and undergraduate degrees in video game design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Video game related subjects. We have had an explosive growth in video game academics over the last 5 to 7 years. And where that lives is in a group called DIGRA, the Digital Interactive Research Association. So video game academics congregate here, and anyone can subscribe to the mailing list and see what they're talking about. I do. It's like really interesting stuff. There's scholarships if people are interested in doing masters or doctorates in this area. Lots of stuff gets posted. It's really fabulous. But what's interesting is over the last few weeks, just seeing what people are doing. There is a ton of people working on data-driven analytic research of Gamergate. And it's going to show lots of interesting stuff is the sense that I get. And it's not going to come out very pro-Gamergate. And it will be based on the data. Now, there's a lag time in terms of things being collated and things being published, but there is clearly, right now, a ton of work being done, just a ton. And I think you'll start seeing this come over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and it I suspect will be overwhelming and will be hopefully the final answer, along with some criminal charges and a few other things, and maybe we can put this sort of pathetic chapter behind us. Here's the one that bothers me, and I don't have an answer to it. And I'm going to go through it very quickly. And it comes out of this course. And it comes out of my lack of understanding. But a couple of years ago, a group like you, I naively asked the women in the class how many of them play first-person shooters, and a number of them did. And the question popped into my mind, not because I understood this. I just said, do you play as a woman or a guy? And they said, this one particular woman who's very good at this and is a very committed gamer, no longer at this law school, working now for a great firm in Vancouver, said, oh no, I never go on as a woman. I can't go on as a woman. I get endlessly harassed. So I have an alias that's a male alias, sort of lower my voice, and I play to my heart's content, pretending to be a guy. And that really bothered me. And, I called Joel back in. I was like, there has to be a remedy to this. Personal identity, who you are. The time of pretending that you're someone else to pass, to get by, surely that must be over. But it's not over online. And let's not pretend that your colleague from the previous class, that this was just her choice. It wasn't really a choice. I talked to her about it. And I'll let you parse through this yourself, but I've tried to work through for you, if anyone's interested, how could this be addressed? And there is no easy way. The best answers seem to lie in the Telecommunications Act, or misconstruing, in my view, the Broadcasting Act. And you end up nowhere that great. You have an argument that if the network operators are not taking some steps to prevent discriminatory abuse, the Telecommunications Act is breached. Nobody's launched any such action. The other obvious place is provincial human rights legislation. I mean, that's a clear place that you could go. No one's gone either place on this issue. So there's the issue. All of this comes back to the magic circle and comes back to, do we have one? Should we have one? And I hate to put it this way, do we deserve one? And the magic circle is around sort of this magical fence that will keep real law out of the world of video games. And it's a very appealing idea. Is it one that you want to believe in? Or do you accept Mia Consalvo, who will be our guest in a couple of minutes, that there really never was one anyways? That we are, in our real world iteration and our online iteration, human and in the real world, and therefore real world laws apply. And you don't get to act a certain way, whether you're part of Gamergate, in a game, or online. You are to be taken as living in the real world with real world legal consequences. And I think, at least for me, Gamergate proves that that should be the case. That there is no absolution, that there is no, it's just got too silly. Which is not to be confused with what do we do with violence in games. And the courts in the United States are incredibly clear on the difference between correlation and causality, and have upheld the creative right to have violence in games in every single case that's gone to the upper courts. So what I got to point out is that in Canada, we have a potentially quite different situation. And if you read especially Irwin Toy and Sharp together, and you just throw in pre-charter case of Montreal versus Arcade Amusements, you could see, if someone wants to write a paper on this, and people have obviously, that the Canadian answer, if it's tested on video game regulation, could be very, very different. All of this becomes very political. It also runs against, this is an attempt to, on one side, show our, how silly censorship looks going backwards and sort of the trajectory of freedom, and also to put it in a Canadian context and, well, a little bit, some American stuff too. And so having that kind of regulation is very uncomfortable. Having that kind of legal intercession is very uncomfortable. I just want to point one thing out. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think I am, because I've read a lot about it, and I've watched all the videos that I can. At no point have I ever heard Anita Sarkeesian or Brianna Wu call for additional laws to curb video game expression. They're criticizing what's in the games. They're criticizing the misogyny that seems to come out of the games. But I have not heard them call for regulation and law. So, a couple of quick things. This is Waters and TSR. This was a case where someone's son committed suicide, and the mother sued the gaming company, and These words are haunting and I think quite brilliant from the judge. His name was Johnny. His death surely was not the fault of his mother or his school or his friends or the manufacturer of the game he and his friends so loved to play. Tragedies such as this simply defy rational explanation, and courts should not pretend otherwise. So there's only so far we can really go with law and regulation. So the answer to Gamergate, yeah, by all means. There's harassment, there's violence, arrest people, charge them. Creating a regime to regulate games may not be the right answer, even if it feels like an instinctive answer. Which goes to, are virtual guns and real guns the same? Is virtual sex and real sex the same? Do you use the same measures? And these are very difficult subjects, great subjects for papers. At this point, we're just dealing with, I just want to make kind of one more point. I don't know if anybody's read Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature, which makes a very cogent argument for, Pinker is a Harvard psychology professor, I believe, makes a very cogent argument that the one way we've progressed as a species is through our dialogue with each other. The reason there's much less violence than there used to be, much less death. You know, he sort of looks at all the statistics. He says, you know, over the course of humanity, we're killing each other a lot less than we ever used to. There's less violence, way less violence. So why is that? That's because we're dialoguing. And I tend to look at Anita Sarkeesian, particularly because she's not calling for regulations and laws on video gaming, as part of the dialogue. She's pointing out what actually seems pretty obvious to me, although you may disagree. And I look at Gamergate as actually the ones who are being censorious and trying to intimidate. Now, again, some people may disagree, but I do want, this is a chart out of 1984, which I'm sure most everyone has read, and you can draw your own parallels to whether that triangle looks a little like Gamergate. Lots of articles. Again, if you're doing work in this area, please go through this. Lots of additional sources. Just want to point out that there's, and I think this is obvious, there's a ton of stuff now that shows that gaming has positive effects on kids and adults. And so I've given you a bunch of that stuff. Game addiction is maybe the one exception to that. Seems real. Don't have time to get into it today.
Okay, great. So you've been talking about violence and misogyny in games. We can talk about that during the Q&A. I didn't have anything put together on that topic, and so I thought I'd just go over some of the work that I've done in relation to cheating in games. And I don't know if you've read any of my stuff. Yes, no?
I have. The class has heard about some of your stuff, and they have your list from what I posted, but I'm not sure if anybody actually read anything, and it's probably unfair 2/3 of the way through the semester to have expected them to. Next year I will put it on the reading list.
No worries at all. Well then this is easy because this is all new. I mean, it'll be new to you, and I'm just going over a lot of the stuff that I wrote. So let's see. Okay. So this was a question that I've been interested in for a while. And it's been almost a decade, maybe in a few years it'll be a decade since I started thinking about this question. And I was really lucky when I first went into it. I thought, you know, I could either define what I thought cheating meant in video games and then see, you know, how players responded, or I could just go in and start talking to players and say, you know, how do you think about games? You know, what do you define as cheating? Do you do those kinds of things? And, you know, if so, why or why not? And it turned out that that was the much smarter route to take. And I got a lot of really interesting answers. And so what I wanted to do now was just take you through some of that early research and the findings that I got. And that book was published in 2007, and then ask the question, do those research findings really still apply now in the changing landscape of gameplay? And some of the more recent research that I've done kind of exploring that question. So, and these are like some of the early slides, so you'll see the background kind of change here. But these are quotes from players, when I had initially asked them the question about, what is it that you like about games? What is it about cheating in games? Why would you cheat or why wouldn't you cheat? So, you can see here, somebody said it's all about suspense. It's like someone telling you how an action movie ends. So what's the point in seeing it if you already know how the movie ends? So cheating kind of ruins the surprise. If a game is good, I'm enjoying it and becomes part of my life. It close my eyes at night to find flashes of the game rushing right inside my head. And I've cheated in games before because sometimes it's fun to not play by the rules or get that God mode feeling. So these are some of the things that people are thinking about in relation to games and why they would make the decision to cheat or not to cheat. So what does it mean to cheat actually in a game? The one thing that everybody agreed on was that cheating gives you some kind of unfair advantage. That, there's this kind of, there should be, maybe there isn't, but there should be some sort of level playing field and, something that gives you a little bit of an edge. And I should say that I was asking people about single-player games, multiplayer games, online and offline. And so their answers are, in response to all of those, and I'll separate out, where they kind of differed. But, there are people who definitely think, you can cheat in a single-player game. And there are some people who think you can't.
Mia,
So this was...
can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
What about, did you, in the definition of cheating in the game, what about people who just were in it to ruin other people's games? I'm a bit of a sim racer, and in the early days of Grand Prix Legends, there were when the software allowed for it, there would be people who would go around the track backwards to crash in and destroy other people's races.
Right.
And just so you know what I did, because I was always the slowest person, I would start intentionally just crashing into those people, and they would eventually go away, which sort of is also my attitude towards Gamergate. I just keep, I'll just crash into them. But, and because they do go away. But are those cheaters, or are those just trolls, and how did they fit into your research, or did they?
Right. They do fit in. And I get into the typology a little bit, but to sort of preview that, there's a couple of different things going on there in your example. So if it's just about ruining the experience for somebody else, then that would be griefing. On the internet generally it would be trolling, but in games researchers call it griefing. So the idea that you're just sort of spoiling the experience, that you don't necessarily want to or care about winning. You just want to kind of make other people upset, ruin their time, play with the system, and, really mess things up. So that would be griefing, which was separate from what I was looking at. Sometimes people enjoy doing that, but then if they also really wanted to win the game, if they were doing those actions strategically, then that was definitely cheating. Right. So that was the distinction I was making, is that they still had to want to get ahead in order for it to be cheating.
Perfect.
Sure. Okay, so everybody agreed, unfair advantage, but then after that, everybody varied really widely in terms of, what would be cheating and what wouldn't. So there was a spectrum that I found where all the way at one end is the purist, who said, anything other than getting through a game, all on your own. And there was one person I talked to who basically said, I'm like, okay, are cheat codes cheating? They said yes. I said, are, walkthroughs cheating? Yes. Is bots cheating? Of course. I said, well, what about like a friend or a brother or sister helping you? And they said yes. So for this person, basically anything outside of what occurred to them in their own mind was cheating. And like I said, this could be definitely in a single-player game as well as a multiplayer game. Then you start moving along, and you get the people, and there are very few people who are actually those purists. Most people sort of are this middle ground here, where code becomes the important thing. And so you get people who say, well, asking a friend is fine, looking up something in a walkthrough or an FAQ, that's okay. It's when you start tinkering with the code of the game itself. So you find a cheat code to use or a bot. You're playing around with the executables and those types of things, and that's where things, they figure that the code is really the boundary, and once you've crossed that line, that means that you're cheating. Okay, I'll get to the hollow win and epiphany loss in a second. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum is, who we think of most in terms of the cheater. And these people think, first of all, that you can only cheat another person. They would say that it's actually impossible to cheat in a single-player game because cheating yourself is not really a thing. So it's kind of interesting that cheaters, even though we think about them as antisocial, are actually sort of weirdly social, because cheating is a social activity for them. Other people have to be involved. And like I was mentioning before, John, this is where they're saying, I want to have any possible advantage. So they may enjoy, causing grief to people, but they really want to get ahead. And one person said to me, interestingly, he was a cheater. He said, I've mastered the game. I know it in and out. I have earned the right to cheat in it, which I thought was pretty interesting. So those are like the practices.
That's very post-constructionist, isn't it?
It's also very handy for justifying his behaviors.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what people defined as cheating. And then I said, so what do you do? And it turns out that everybody cheats at some point or another. And so it's very much, like a do what I say, not what I do kind of thing. And people cheated there were 4 main reasons. The first and the most common, the most boring, unexciting reason is that people get stuck. A game is too hard, so either you're a novice player, or maybe you're new to this particular genre of game. Maybe the game is broken, or there's some weird spike in difficulty level. Something's going on. There's some mismatch there. And think about it. It's not like a movie where something happens and you lean over to your friend and you're like, I don't really understand what just happened. It's not like the movie grinds to a halt and won't let you progress until you figure it out. The movie keeps going. Unfortunately, the game does not. And you reach this point where it's either, well, I've tried this level 50 times. I can either look up the answer or, I guess, just play another game. And so most of the time here, people really don't want to cheat. This is like the last resort for them. And I remember that hollow win and epiphany loss. This is the idea that, you're really stuck. You don't know what to do. You look up the answer. It doesn't make you feel good. We've all had that experience like, oh, that's it. And it's not like you feel great about it, but it lets you move forward. Most of the time, people don't want to look up every single answer in a game, right? Because that sense of achievement, which is what they're really after, gets lost. That epiphany that, oh my God, I figured it out. I'm so smart. I'm so clever. You lose that when you're looking up these answers or using a code or a cheat. And so, people try and avoid this as much as possible. The second reason is that it's just fun. Sometimes people would say, I want all the goodies in a game right away. And interestingly, people would justify this most often by saying, well, I played through the game once all on my own and I beat it, so I've earned this. Going back to this idea that you've earned the right to cheat. But, you want to get all the levels, all the guns, all the fancy cars without having to go through the progression. You just want to lord it over, literally. The third reason was to hit fast forward. So for players, sometimes, and this happens a lot with RPGs, it's a really long game. People get tired of it. They want to see how it ends, so they want to skip to that final ending. Alternately, like in an MMO, you've got all of this grinding that you need to do to earn money to get to a certain level or to get, certain achievements. And suddenly people are going, I really don't want to put in all of this time. This is sort of like, you're reading a book, it's like a mystery novel. You want to know who did it, but you're sick of the book, so you just skip to the last page and you read it to see. And that's kind of the equivalent of hitting fast forward. And then finally, to be a jerk, which is what I mentioned. You really enjoy kind of taking other people down, but you also want to kind of get ahead as part of that. So like that was the first part of the research, where I was looking at this is the context of like 2005, 2006 is when I was doing most of these interviews and surveys, and what I thought was most interesting was that people most of the time really did not want to cheat. They really wanted this sense of achievement and accomplishment that they got from games. Cheating was rationalized often as like a last resort behavior or as something that was like outside of the scope of gameplay. And I actually argued, I think that, more people, it would be interesting to see them like cheat to like explore the bounds of the space and like what's possible and to see how they feel about it, because it's a relatively safe space to cheat in a game versus, like cheating on a test or cheating on your taxes. So that was, the first part. So this is the context, WoW and Counter-Strike. So you fast forward about 7 years, and we've still got big budget games like that. So this is the latest Tomb Raider game. But the landscape's also changed quite a bit. So we have places like Facebook and social networks where suddenly new types of games have appeared. And I got to thinking, do people still think about cheating in the same ways? Are their practices still the same? Do the games still enable and constrain the same types of cheating? This is just from earlier this year. You can see this is the monthly average use for Facebook apps. And numbers 1, 2, and 3 are all Saga games. These are put out by King.com. Candy Crush Saga, still the huge one. And you have to go down to, number 13 to see Farmville 2. And then even below that, it's Pop-Up Hair Saga. So how many of you have played like a Candy Crush type game? I see one hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, there's two hands up. You have to remember these are law students, and if they start playing these games, their semester is cooked.
My students don't admit to playing them either. I actually had an assignment where I asked my students to play social network games as a group, and a few of them even created fake Facebook accounts so that their friends did not know that they were playing these games. And it really backfired on one of them because he found a game that he really liked playing, and then the assignment ended and all the other students in the class left and he was stuck playing it by himself, and he ended up writing a really interesting paper on how can you play a social network game by yourself. It was really kind of interesting. It's very hard. It's a long story. Okay, so that was the landscape. So this is what Candy Crush looks like. When we actually started doing a survey and some interviews with players, though, this is how fast things change in terms of like the games landscape now. A year before, the Ville type games, the Zynga games were the most popular ones. So I think this is Castleville, Farmville, Frontierville. Any of those types of build and harvest style games were really the most popular ones, and the match 3 games were just sort of emerging. So most of the research is based on like this type of gameplay. So just sort of revisiting really quickly, why, do people cheat in games, and how would that apply to these types of games? So I did a quick analysis of these games before interviewing and surveying players. Getting stuck, the most common reason that people cheat in games. It's really hard to get stuck in these types of games. They lay out for you, as you can see here, very clearly, oftentimes quests are just simple 1 step or 2. Even if they are, as you can see here, quest 11 of 11, very clear indications of what you need to do. So practically impossible. Here again, you can see, it's conveniently checking off for you what you've already done. Do you have 4 crystals to advance? You only have 1. Well, you can post to your friends easily enough in order to get more. And here you can see again, they will also even aggregate for you in your multiple quests. Post to friends, post to friends, post to friends. So it would, I think, actually be challenging. It would be a challenge to get stuck in most social network games right now. Playing God, the idea that you want all of the goodies right away. There are a couple of ways that you can do that. There are some unofficial illegal bots that that you can download to get all of those things. Of course, there's also the fast forward, the idea that you want to kind of skip ahead to the good stuff. And there is an unofficial and an official. The unofficial is the Gamers Unite. There's a snag bar you can install, and you can easily get stuff with other people who are playing the game as well. But then there's the official version where you just spend money in order to get these things. And then finally, that every possible advantage, this is actually really hard to do. If cheating, if getting stuck is difficult, getting every possible advantage is almost impossible, because it's very hard to be negative in these types of games. Think about like games you can see on the bottom right here. Other players can go, let's say, to your farm and like water your crops for you or chop down a tree. Let's say you didn't want them to chop down that tree, you liked it. You see their little avatar icon and you can accept their help or not, right? So it's not that they can really show up and cause mayhem. The one example I found of a game that did not do this, that allowed for some kind of interesting negative play, was Fish World, which you can see up here, where you had a fish bowl, you could collect fish and raise them. You could go and visit your friend's fish tank and steal a fish. And then you would log in, and you would get this notice, your friend just stole your fish. You had to log in 24 hours, and you could go and steal your fish back. If you did not go within that time period, the fish was gone forever. And like that was the only example of like a negative activity I could find. So really it's hard to get every possible advantage against other people. Most of these games are, I can do well and you can do well. It's not that I'm going to do well at the expense of you. Of course, even though it may be difficult to cheat or impossible in some cases, that doesn't mean players don't complain about it or suspect other players. You probably can't see these very well. These are just informal polls that people had put up on the Zynga forum sites about your opinion of cheating. You can't see this here, but basically people would go on the boards and talk about, well, I have this neighbor and he got up to level 400 in like 3 days. That's ridiculous and it's horrible, and this kind of behavior shouldn't be allowed. Now, it doesn't mean that your farm is any worse off, but people really thought, you should not be allowed to cheat. You should be punished. And this is where I get into the importance of platforms, which I think is the really interesting thing. So what I hadn't really considered in the original research was how the platform that you play on shapes the game and the system that you're playing in and within. And also if you think about social networks as a platform, that can apply as well. So, the earliest games had, they were arcade games. That was a specific platform. You played for a certain amount of time until you ran out of life, and then you threw in another. Games were designed to be easy to figure out, but were, never ending. You could die pretty quickly so that you had to throw in more quarters, right? Things changed. We got systems that came along. Suddenly, you could have games that were longer with save points that changed, how games were designed. You didn't obviously need to keep throwing quarters in anymore. You could have more expansive experiences. Of course, they weren't all so successful, but just the idea is that the platform changed, who was playing and how they were playing, as well as the design of the game. And if you're interested, there's like a whole thing called platform studies. So, Facebook and game design. I mentioned we did a survey and some interviews, so this was almost a year and a half ago now. With a couple of PhD students, we did some surveys of adults. You can see here the age range. And these were people who said that they liked playing social network games, so games like Farmville and Bejeweled and those types of things. And for people who were interested, we did a few follow-up interviews. And the focuses were on a couple things. One was how people played with their families, which I won't go into as much here, but then also their views about cheating in these types of games. And so I'm just going to show you a few snapshots of how they responded to questions from the survey to give you a sense. So would you consider it cheating if someone convinced a friend or family member to play a Facebook game solely for the purpose of advancing gameplay? Obviously, they did not think this was really cheating. Would you consider it cheating if someone added strangers solely to advance gameplay? Again, the vast majority said no, but a few more people do actually think this is cheating behavior. Have you ever logged into someone else's account to advance your own gameplay? Getting a little murkier here. 80% said no. yes, 20%. Would you consider logging into someone else's account cheating? So look at the distinction here.
Wow.
So about half of people consider this to be cheating, but about 20% of them are actually doing this. And when we talked to them, it was usually family members who they said that they were doing this with. Would you consider it cheating if someone made additional accounts for the sole purpose of advancing gameplay? Almost 42% said yes. So these are people who were like saying, I need so many neighbors to expand my farm in Farmville, and I'm having trouble finding those people, so I'm just going to create, an account for my dog. Oh, it's a little cut off. Have you ever used cheat codes in a Facebook game to advance gameplay? This is something I found again and again. People, think that cheat codes are clearly cheating, and they really don't like to use them. I think with Facebook, they're so afraid of malware that's why they don't want to use codes of any sort. So would you consider it cheating if someone were to use a cheat code? Again, yes.
Are cheat codes, Mia, in your
Yeah.
experience, are cheat codes and I'm going back to your platform point, cheat codes in a PC gaming context, are they seen as being cheating to the same extent? Because I would have guessed not. Now, I'm thinking of unlock codes in racing games where the developer locked a bunch of the content so that you progress through the game a certain way, and most of us who were sim racers just didn't like any of that nonsense, and so someone would post the code for Need for Speed, and you just unlock the content that was already there. And
Right.
at least to me, maybe I'm amoral, it didn't feel like cheating.
Yeah, that's actually the thing. In single-player games, it's really not considered, it might be considered cheating, but it really doesn't have the moral valency. It's not a big deal. In the single-player game, it's yours to do with as you want. And so it's like you're saying, it's totally fine. It's when it goes multiplayer that the codes become more serious.
And just to be clear, because not everyone here is a sim racer, those same developers generally made all the content available online. So if you're in an online mode in Need for Speed, this isn't true today, but a couple of years ago, all the cars would be open to you. So it actually wasn't an issue.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, the codes that are there, a lot of times, these were developer codes that they were using to debug and test the game.
Right.
And they would leave them in, and the marketers knew that they could use those as a way to keep interest in the game going, by finding them and unlocking them later. But in the online games, then they had to go in and disable them because, if people started using them and cheating, or the same thing happens with glitches, then it would destroy the online community and then the economic base of your game.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so
We have a question, sorry.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, when
Hit the button just to see if...
can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Just to clarify, when we're speaking about cheat codes, are we talking about the sort of up, down, A, B, start, select to get infinite lives thing? Or are we talking modifying the executable on a PC game using some sort of hack that's posted? Was there any sort of distinction made in the survey between those two?
Right. In the survey, there was not. We just asked about cheat codes. And these were people who were playing primarily social network games. And there was this interesting discrepancy, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But they often saw, they looked at these activities through the lens of this type of gameplay almost to the exclusion of other types. So modifying an executable was not in the landscape of possibility for most of these players. And I'm not saying technically they were unable. I mean, if you're thinking about a game like Farmville or Candy Crush Saga, that type of activity does not make sense, like it would in Counter-Strike, for example. So we were kind of letting them define the terms here in the survey. And then we pushed a little deeper in some of the interviews. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so going back to the survey, just a few more things to highlight before I get to the interviews. So we asked, have you ever purchased game currency or point cards? Almost 40% said yes. And would you consider buying currency or point cards to advance gameplay cheating? Almost 93% said no. And this was one of the most interesting things to me because, when I had done the original research on cheating, this was, the era of World of Warcraft and EverQuest, online games where, the games themselves did not allow you to, you paid a monthly subscription fee, and that was it. This is before free-to-play, freemium-type games. Sony might have experimented like with one server where you could buy things, but that was it. So you were really not allowed to, purchase items in the game. If you did, you were doing so illegally through third-party sources. And players at that time really reacted in strongly negative ways to that type of activity. They called it cheating. They said it destroyed the economy of games. They considered you, like morally corrupt if you did that, lots of players. And suddenly, because now you see this type of activity is integrated into the gameplay, it's a normal thing that you do in Farmville or in Candy Crush Saga, suddenly it's just totally flipped and everybody thinks, it's not cheating at all, because it's considered, it's legal, it's promoted. Some people do it, but even if they don't, they still don't consider it cheating. So there's this really interesting, shift. And then this was the other kind of weird thing that came up. We asked, is cheating in a console or computer game different than cheating in a Facebook game? And about a third of the people said yes. And we weren't sure what to do with this. There was an open-ended response here where, people could clarify. And it came down to a few different things. Some people said that Facebook games were not zero-sum, like you weren't really competing against others, so what would it matter if you cheated? Some people said, they're not serious games. They're not real games. Like that came up. People saw them as kind of different. Some people thought they conflated console and computer games with actually single-player games, and Facebook was multiplayer. So it's really interesting when you ask people about games and gameplay. They're operating under very different assumptions about what these things mean. So I think what this shows is just have to be really careful and really either particular or have the ability to go back to them later to say, like, what do you mean and why? Because people are not using the same definition of games at all. So just a couple things that came out of this data, which was sort of interesting, and maybe from your perspective as well for your class. What makes this different, we think, and how people respond is, first of all, you're playing it as yourself. It's not like World of Warcraft where you have just any account that you can set up with any ID. And also, it's not just you're playing as you, but it's people like your mom and your sister and your best friend and maybe people that you work with. So this might change how you interact with people. It doesn't mean that you'll cheat more or less, but that for you, the valence has changed because these are people you know rather than strangers. And again, so here, there's that difference. Some people obviously do play MMOs with groups of people that they know from daily life. Others play, with people that they may only have a single interaction with. So that's going to change how people think about it.
Can I ask a question in that context?
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the class? Because I want to ask you about EVE Online, and have you looked at that and how that fits? Because it's such a strange, and I think very positive, but others may feel otherwise, kind of rule set to that game. In terms of what's cheating, what isn't cheating, and how it really becomes merged with the real world.
Well, EVE, I have not studied EVE. I don't have the stomach to study EVE. I know several people who have and who are writing dissertations about EVE Online. And I would say that actually you can't really cheat in that game because the developers have set it up such that they've said basically anything outside of, I guess, racketeering would be considered, acceptable gameplay. And so the players have set up this system of, intrigue and espionage and corruption and, underhanded behavior that's all considered okay. And so it would be interesting to gain access to see, like, what what do they define as cheating? Does cheating exist in that space? Because I'm not really sure what it would look like.
And you've written on the Magic Circle, and the interrelationship between the Magic Circle and EVE Online is a very seems like a very fertile area for study.
Oh, definitely. And I know someone who's doing a dissertation now on EVE and how people construct identities within the game space, and he wants to look at, you know, those identities versus, you know, their daily life identities, and is there, you know, how closely do they match? Do people construct, because you don't have like a typical avatar in EVE like you would in something like World of Warcraft. It's like you have a spaceship that you control. And so he's interested in like how much are people playing really kind of as themselves versus a constructed persona or multiple personas. So that'll be really interesting to see.
Please go on, but I just want to check in with the class, see if there are any questions, any other questions to this point. Okay, you're good.
Okay. So, so yeah, going back to the family and the context of play, you know, how things change. So, you know, people, when we ask them in interviews about, you know, how they played, especially those who played with family members, you know, did anything change? And they said, you know, they were much more aware of their family and how they might be judged. And also interesting, like how they were judging each other. And so it didn't mean that they were necessarily harsher on people who cheated. Actually, you know, like your brother might get a specific allowance for doing something. It just meant that they were taking that relationship into greater account when making the judgment, right? So, so that mattered more. Like who was doing the activity mattered more almost than what the activity was. We asked them about, you know, what does it mean to be social in these types of games? And, you know, what is it about social interaction that might lead to or keep you from cheating? So people said, you know, feel the games are social because you need other players to progress, you know, that these games weren't really social in the sense that there were any deep, meaningful interactions, just that, well, you kind of need other people, you know, it's a transactional thing. Others said, you know, the asynchronous nature of a lot of the games eliminates sociality. You know, you're really not playing with other people, you know, in a game space at the same time like you would even in places like EVE Online or EverQuest. You know, in these games, you're not doing that. And so if you believe Facebook games less in-depth play meant they couldn't be very social. Interestingly, you know, we asked them about terms of service versus game rules and if they saw a distinction there, and pretty much nobody did. Because if you think about, like, if people said you're breaking the rules of a game, that means that you're cheating. Lots of people were not necessarily breaking the rules of a game, but they were breaking the terms of service of Facebook. So they said things like they would, you know, make other accounts, which is not really a game violation, but it is a Facebook violation. They said, well, some of the games practically force you to do this, 58%, so they wouldn't consider it cheating if you made additional accounts for the sole purposes of advancing gameplay. I just think this is interesting because there's this confusion here you know, they're just sort of being smooshed together, that Facebook rules and game rules are becoming the same kind of mushy ground that players are dealing with. Well, and they're not seeing them as separate entities.
It's also, and there's no reason you should know this, Nia, but we spent probably 3 weeks on terms of service and end-user license agreements. So it's also really interesting that people would see, in the context of this class, that feel that they were not cheating, but they are contractually in breach. In sort of the way we've gone through the course, I would suggest that shows a great deficiency in the end-user license agreements and the terms of service, and shows how little people actually know about those things. And that's been one of the themes of the course. But that's sort of a real pivot point in this course. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and this is the other point then probably you'll find interesting, you know, the idea of logging into another player's account. Half the survey participants said, you know, they thought this activity was cheating, half did not. Some did admit to the practice. And what mostly this related to was logging into a family member's account. And this could be to help the family member advance in a game, or it could be to help yourself advance in the game. Sometimes people would say things like, well, you know, I got my dad to play this game to help me, and I thought he'd like it, and he got bored, but so he stopped playing. So now I just log into his account to like send my account gifts. And they didn't see this as cheating. I mentioned here, some said it was like might be considered an invasion of privacy. But again, this was couched as like these are families doing these types of activities. And of course, this isn't that different. You know, lots of teens will admit to logging into each other's Facebook accounts to either prank one another or do whatever.